So before we proceed to some closing remarks, may I just ask if somebody has something to add after the last session, maybe some last thoughts that really hit you and that you would like to share with everybody? Yes, please.
Thank you. Actually, I shared my thoughts in the lab, but it was not noted, so I don't mind to say it again. When it comes to inequalities, and especially for the newcomers in the hosting societies, I think it is very important to highlight also the global citizenship education to the hosting societies and to the youngsters in the hosting societies. Because if we focus a lot about the integration of refugee, we have also to understand that integration is not only the integrations of the newcomers in the societies, but it's a vis-a-vis relation. And in my youth work in Slovenia, since 2 years I was working in the intercultural dialogue, and I received many questions about why we should receive newcomers. What if our situation goes down if we receive newcomers? I received these questions, and we cannot ignore these questions. And actually, global citizenship is the answer for these questions, that it is not an option. We are all part of this globe, and it is not a question. It is just a reality that we should face together. And the young people of Europe deserve this answer from us, that we are doing this not because we are doing a charity, we are doing this because we are all global citizens and we have responsibilities toward each other. So just to keep the balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Very useful remark, especially for our reflections now and afterwards. Anybody else? No? There will be still the evening to exchange for those who are leaving tomorrow. So I would like to invite, as you know, the partnership is a cooperation between two institutions, the European Union and the Council of Europe, and the European Union represented by the European Commission in this case. But it's also people who follow and are very closely involved in the work of the partnership and who care also about good outcomes for all these activities that we are trying to do together. So I invite first to speak, to make closing remarks, Karin Lopata-Loibl, who is from the Directorate General Education and Culture at the European Commission. Karin.
Thank you, Tanya. In fact, I'm quite impressed how many people are still here, because these have been 2.5 really long and intensive days of work. And so thank you very much. I will not take too much of your time. I have done, I don't know how many closings of such partnership events. And I thought this time I will do it a bit differently. And so as I was here for the whole symposium, and I participated, and I spoke to the participants, and I just consulted with the participants, and I said, so if you were to do the closing, what would you say? And I got a couple of really nice proposals and remarks, and one is from Raluca, who is sitting over there, and I think no one could say it any better than she did this morning. She said, well, we heard Amira, there's nothing to be added. This was a fantastic summary of this symposium. And I think she's absolutely right. And she said, oh, we should hear her again. And I don't know whether her poem was recorded, but at least I heard that the poem will be on the website of the partnership of this event. So thank you very much for this proposal. And Mark, for instance, said, okay, we had great symposium. For me, a very interesting experience coming from the police, and it's the first time I participate in a youth symposium. But in fact, what's next? And what are the next steps? And I thought this is a very good point, and I will come back to this point a bit later in my closing, which I tried to be really short because you're all tired. maybe I should reverse the order. Normally, we also say thank you at the end. And I thought this time to do something a little bit different. I'll start with the thank you part. And first of all, I would like to thank you all, because it was really amazing how you all participated. And I would like to say, of course, specific thanks to those who had active roles and who helped to make this symposium a success, especially, of course, also the members of the steering group. I would like to thank definitely Antje and the Council of Europe, because, as you know, this is a joint event between the European Commission and the Council of Europe. And there is one person whom I would like to thank particularly, and she's sitting to my right, and I know she's the one who has done the enormous job of preparing this symposium in a relatively short time, also at our request, I must say. And I would really like to thank you and say, great job, and I'm sure that everyone will agree. Thank you, really, yeah? Well, much has been said. I'm not going to repeat, or I just refer to a couple of points. Cross-sectorial approach was mentioned, a genuine cross-sectorial approach. And this is exactly what we in the European Union are striving for the youth sector, because the youth sector can definitely not deal alone with the enormous challenges that young people are faced with today. We have the economic crisis, we have the immigration crisis, all kinds of crises, youth unemployment, and these challenges can only be dealt with in a cross-sectorial approach. And I was glad to hear it, that this is shared, obviously, throughout the majority, at least, of the participants. It was mentioned a couple of times. Another point that was mentioned, let me start with another point which is really important to me and to the institution I represent here, and that is I'm really happy that we had refugee activists here. It is so important to stress the word which we all have heard a couple of times already. It's not about them, it's with them. And I'm so happy, and thank you very much, that this was also a specific focus of the symposium. This was also a specific request from the Commission. And I will definitely take back what I have heard in the labs and in the closing session back to Brussels, to my colleagues. Different forms of involving the participants. During the coffee break, I said to Tanya, I really like this new sitting order. And then there was a new approach, which was that after presentation, the 3 or 5 people sitting next to each other would then discuss what they have heard or how they liked the presentation or just add their thoughts. So that was, it's not on the content, it's just on the way things were organized. You could even say innovative forms were used of making participants participate even more instead of just listening. The garden conversation, I think, was very successful, and I had the impression that people really enjoyed it. Of course, there were the traditional parts, like the fair, for instance, which is always a success and always important, so that our participants can show the activities they do in their NGOs, for instance. And I would now like to take up a couple of points from the wrap-up, which we have heard. I've already mentioned the cross-sectorial. It was called also connectivity, dialogue approach in a safe and permanent space. When I mention a couple of points, it's no ranking by no means, and it does not mean that the other proposals were less good or something. I just want to repeat what we all have heard before. I just take out a few points, and I invite you to add if you feel that I should have mentioned something else. Strengthen youth work sector and visibility, definitely. Increase resources and recognition for this sector. Transferability, sustainability, and good practices. Peer learning, this point was made quite strongly. Reaching young people, not only contact them, but understand their needs. And digital participation was mentioned, creating tools of active participation. And last but not least, we heard just about the global citizenship proposal. Now, why I picked these points is that I would like to briefly share with you what the Commission will do or is doing with this. Because this would be the next point on my closing agenda, taking up the point of Mark, what's next? What's next is, it's nice to have a report, because I said to Tanya, so what will you do next? What is the partnerships plan? And she said, there will be a report. And Mark before said, if you stop there, it's like a broken pencil. What's the point? It has no point. So it's good to have a report, but we need to take further the messages that we have heard. There are key messages which will be nicely, as usual, be put together, but there might be messages that each of you has heard in the labs, in the discussions, in the garden conversations, wherever, and I really invite you, each of you, to take these messages further, to do something with them and about them. So what will the Commission do? Just to give an example, for instance, we have 2 expert groups, and 2 new expert groups, and one will deliver a specific toolkit by the end of this year for youth workers, youth organizations, and policymakers with practical advice and guidelines on how youth work can promote active citizenship, prevent marginalization, and violent radicalization, which is also, as you might know, an important topic in the work of the EU. Another expert group is planned for next year to examine how youth work can best contribute to the integration of young refugees in their environments. So I think it might be useful for you to know about this. Please check also out our website, get engaged through the European Youth Portal. If you would like to add something, please do so. Online tools were mentioned. I should inform you that my commissioner, Mr. Tibor Navracsics, who happens to be from this beautiful city, Budapest, announced the creation of an online tool of Erasmus+. So to say, the Erasmus+ exchanges are, we could say, our best brand. And to reach out in the sense of that I've mentioned before, not only contact, but really reach out to more young people, to allow, so to say, exchanges, but without people having to really go to another country, there will be created a new online Erasmus+ exchange. And the idea is to reach out to 200,000 young people in Europe, in the Middle East, and in Africa by 2019. Sport, cross-sectorial, I said it's important, so I should also give an example what the Commission does about it. My director, you have heard him on the first day, Mr. Antonio Silva Mendes. He is not only in charge of youth, but also of sports, and he is really the first one to do what he preaches. And so when he preaches cross-sectorial approach, he almost every day makes sure that we also cooperate, the colleagues from sport and from youth. And in this respect, there will be created, as announced also by Commissioner Navracsics, a new European award for social inclusion in sport. And let me close by taking up the last point that was made by a participant here, which linked to the global citizenship. I would like to share with you another piece of information which my charming colleague Corinna just sent me today by email. She said, watch out, there's something new on the PISA tests. The PISA tests, you know, are sort of international standards for comparing education systems around the world. And it's done by the OECD, another international organization. And just this year, they are considering to add and to measure a new skill, which is called global skills. And the idea is, it still has, of course, to be defined, but the idea is to measure the awareness of different cultures and beliefs as part of the formal education system. And I think that's an interesting new development which I really would like to share with you. I will not take your attention any longer. I would like to thank you again very much for your participation. And please, let's take this further. We want pencils that are not broken, but in a whole piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karin. It's always good to contextualize and also to come again to see in our heads how we can connect to other initiatives, other policy initiatives and frameworks. And on that, I also invite Antje Rotemund, head of the Youth Department of the Council of Europe, to tell us how this feeds into the work of the Council of Europe.
1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, okay. Well, last but I hope not least, I like to be opening speaker because this is an easy job. Most people have just arrived and still think about whether their package also arrived, and they are still a bit disturbed by the journey. So they forget immediately what you say. And for the closing speech, it's the same, because people are already thinking about their package, will it arrive at home? And half of the people have left already. And those who are left think, okay, will there be something more interesting than what we have been hearing for 3 days? And of course, it will not be. So, opening speeches and closing speeches are therefore immediately forgotten, and this is why I like them, because they are not going into the history books. Having said that, I would like to thank the speeches that have not been forgotten, namely the very creative presentation of the labs, of the results of the discussions in the symposium. And also Andre, I don't see him, where's Andre? Ah, you are listening, good. And Andre for his very concise and very rich report and the summary as the favorite rapporteur of this symposium. So I would like to do 3 things. I would like to share some of my impressions that I have, being here like Karin also for the whole duration of the symposium, or mainly in the plenary sessions actually. I would like to also share with you a couple of things planned in the follow-up from the Council of Europe side. And last but not least, I would also like to follow my obligations for the formal institutional closing of this event. And I start with the impressions. My impressions, and there were many, were that there were a lot of questions which I would like to formulate actually slightly differently. So a lot of the statements also in the final reports of the labs and even in the final reports of Andre, a lot of the statements came with a question mark. And there are some statements that I would like to put again, but with an exclamation mark. Yes, the youth sector is definitely an advocate for young people and their rights, exclamation mark. Yes, there are many excellent examples that show how youth work can reach young people and also disadvantaged young people, exclamation mark. And I'm not going to say exclamation mark again, so you have to think it, okay? Yes, youth work reaches young people and works with and for young people. That's my favorite, actually. Yes, international youth work and international events are an extremely apt methodology to break isolation, particularly of disadvantaged young people, to get out of a closed environment in order to create network and alliances with others that live through similar situations somewhere else. And yes, youth workers organize themselves more and more because youth workers have realized that they have to organize themselves if this work or this profession, which we are just about to define, also both for the voluntary contributions of the youth leaders and the youth organizations, as well as those for full-time staff, if this work is to be recognized. And yes, there are very good examples where policy follows the practice. For example, the ENTER recommendation that was mentioned at the first day is a Committee of Ministers recommendation of the Council of Europe, which came from a project of disadvantaged and for disadvantaged young people, which was presented by Biljana on the first day. And yes, our work is very important also in the global context and in the intercultural learning process and intercultural dialogue between people, not only between young people, when it comes to also create more understanding and break down stereotypes and prejudices. Now, there could be some more, but I would like to start with a follow-up now. There are few things that have been mentioned, nevertheless, I would like to say them again. The ENTER recommendation, I just mentioned it, is now a very solid part of the Council of Europe's youth sector's program, because it is not enough to have a policy recommendation, but we also want to promote it to the people that should implement it. So our program for the next 2 years includes what's called in the program dissemination of this recommendation, but what it actually means is to find municipalities, local authorities that are ready to implement the recommendations there in their local context. Access to rights was mentioned very often. Many of you might know that we have been developing in our co-managed structures with the Joint Council on Youth a draft recommendation for the access to rights for young people. And this is a very strong document, it's a very embracing document, and it's a very good policy document, and we hope that it will be adopted on the 30th of June 2016 by the committee that will then send it to another committee that will then adopt it the month after. Now, I was there, they discussed it last week, and there were many governments speaking in favor of this recommendation, and that was a very uplifting experience because many governments said, yes, we have to give young people access to rights because this is important for our societies, as we know that just societies are also more successful societies. We work also on another recommendation which I think will interest many of you, and that's the recommendation on youth work. And we hope that this will be one policy document that really can push forward a European agenda for youth work, for not only for the recognition, but also for the support and for the importance of youth work as a youth policy measure and as a youth policy implementing agency. As a lot of talk was about with and for, and I am still under the impression of an activity that we had 10 days ago in the European Youth Center in Strasbourg, and that was an activity for young refugees and unaccompanied minors. And we had 40 young people that came to Strasbourg, all of them refugees or unaccompanied minors, who, well, half of them were unaccompanied minors, I think 17, who were connected in with a youth organization that was actually created in the Council of Europe context. It's called Voice of Young Refugees in Europe, and they call themselves VAIRI. So VAIRI brought these people together, and we had a very interesting and important week with young refugees, who came up with a lot of good suggestions, but suggestions on how we can help further from the international level. But more importantly, we managed to bring everybody who was invited to France and to Strasbourg. So when I heard you earlier on, there was this question about travel restrictions, no? I thought, and that is one of the offer I would like to make to those of you who work with young refugees and wish to organize an international event. You know that the 2 European Youth Centers of the Council of Europe are diplomatic territory, and we have opportunities also to negotiate with the foreign affairs and with the ministries in charge of entering a country for people with funny travel documents that an NGO would not have. So if you, we are talking about creating spaces and opportunities. So if you feel you want to organize something like that and you need a space, I think the Council of Europe can also create the opportunity, and we can help you also with let's say, customs facilities and formalities. We helped a lot of disadvantaged young people in the Council of Europe to organize themselves, because we know that networking and creating alliances are very important to push a certain subject forward. I just mentioned one, VAIRI, but there are many more. Women from minorities, minorities of Europe, the young Roma organizations, Muslim youth organizations, many, many more. I think we were less successful in promoting to the big chunk of, I would call them now, more established or more experienced or longer standing youth organizations, to have a more integrative approach. And that is something that I would also like to address to our members of the Advisory Council. Probably this is something we should look into a bit more in detail in future on how the larger bulk of youth organizations can attract young people from disadvantaged background to become members and to integrate them like that in the society. I also would like to mention, because there were a couple of presentations where there were some, bullet points, no data available. Actually, the Council of Europe has a number of data which could be helpful for all of you on a larger Europe, on a 47 member states or even 50 in the framework of the European Cultural Convention, particularly also when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to violence against children. So this data is available, and please do not hesitate contacting us if you look for this, either through our colleagues from the partnership and the European Knowledge Center and Youth Policy, or directly with the Council of Europe. I would like to end by mentioning one more point, and that is really and the follow-up, because then comes still the formal thing. The larger Europe. I mean, what we experience is that there is, in fact, a closing of the geographical divides. So the world becomes more global, the distances become mentally shorter, there is let's say, the cognitive maps become larger, but the gap at the same time, we witness that the gap, the social gap, becomes larger. So, and I think this is really a challenge also for us who work in the international context, to see what we can do to avoid that this gap between rich and poor, between those people with access and those without, between the educated and those without access to education does not become bigger as it already is. Formal closing. This symposium was a further stepping stone. There was also a lot of talk about stepping stones. A further stepping stone in the reflections on how barriers to social inclusion of young people in vulnerable situations can be broken down. And the work, particularly the work of the partnership of the Council of Europe and the European Commission, will certainly continue to work in this area, and also look into how youth work and youth policy can develop and make more provisions in this regard. We hope that in this we can also involve the research community, because it is good to base practice and policy also on knowledge. We are presently negotiating the future program for the partnership between our two institutions. And Karin mentioned it already. I think the recommendations of this symposium, like recommendations of other activities, will certainly be taken into account. And social inclusion of young people, youth participation, and youth work development will remain priority. That far we are already. Now, I like to end by thanking, because I was not as creative as Karin to turn everything upside down. And I also was completely non-participative in preparing. So I'd like to thank, first of all, our institutional partner, the European Commission, in the preparation and implementation of this event, and for the good cooperation. I'd like to thank the team of organizers, the partnership team under the leadership of Tanya for preparing here, the facilitators, the lab facilitators, the rapporteurs of the labs, the speakers, and all of you for sharing your experience and entering in another sort of process of trying to construct common projects for the future and for the present. I'd also like to thank those people who are not here, those who followed us on the online streaming, and those people who worked in the background, wherever they are, to make this event a success. Not only the staff of the center, but also those in Strasbourg or those people back home that helped you to come here. And last but not least, thank you for already now for what you will do after, and for your commitment and your involvement in standing up against inequality and against injustice, and for your commitment to human rights and to the protection of human dignity. And have a good and safe trip home, all of you.
Thank you, Antje, for having done part of my my thanks as well. Both of you, actually, you've been very gracious with the partnership team. Thank you, but also with all. It's taken a lot of people who are perhaps not sitting here, and people who have contributed a lot. So that's always what makes somehow a symposium interesting for everybody. Karin had a point she wanted to mention.
Thank you, Tanya. In fact, you see, I'm really reversing orders, because after the closing speech of the Council of Europe, I asked for the floor again, but I think it's for something really important, which is really dear to my heart, and I really want to do it. I would like one particular person to stand up, and I would like to thank him, because this is probably the last symposium in which he will take part as part of the partnership team, and the last event in which I will also take part in this configuration, so to say. It's a very dear colleague with whom I've been working for 15 years, someone who has started as a youth worker, who was a national expert in the European Commission, in the Youth Policy Unit, being involved and actively co-writing the EU Youth Strategy, the white paper, it was called at the time. Someone with whom I did not always agree, and still don't, but someone with whom I absolutely share the same passion for youth. Someone who brought to the youth field really his experience, knowledge, and definitely enthusiasm. From early in the morning till late in the night, you will hear him discussing and really bringing all his efforts towards moving the youth sector further at the European level, national, but also local level, and who has, of course, a specific interest also in youth work. I would like to thank Hanjo Schild very much for everything you have done for the partnership. In the name of both. Standing ovations, please.
That is a very unexpected exercise. So yeah, absolutely. So I'm surprised, a bit also touched, of course. Thank you very much. I don't want to hold a long speech, but Karin was right. I mean, that was. I'm passionate in youth issues, but specifically on this issue that we discussed here during the last days. It was also my idea 1.5 years ago that we organized such a symposium on unequal Europe. Because since I ever work in the youth field, the subject of inequalities and of social inclusion of young people was my issue over years as a social worker and as a volunteer and later as a professional, then also in more management functions and so forth. And also when we wrote the white paper on youth, it was one of my key issues that we include the whole issue of social dimension of young people into the white paper and give it a right place anyhow. And this continued then also within the partnership, and therefore I think it's a right place also to say thank you to all of you to having supported me. I mean, I have many people who have closely cooperated over the years, and so of course I could not have done this alone anyhow. And therefore I'm thankful for all these years. And you certainly will see me also further in the field anyhow, probably not in this function here, probably I come as a guest to other symposia or so, but not in the function as a member of the partnership team. So thank you very much.
Hope that you allow me, because that was, everybody admired that badge, Forever Young, and Karin had just 2 pieces. She gave 1 to me, and I think I don't deserve that anymore. This is for you.
Well, it's a short closing session, but very emotional, and rightfully so. We should take time to celebrate when we can, people who have contributed so much. Very few points. You have been all great and exhausted your brains and twisted your minds and contributed more ideas, practices, and more questions as to where we want to take this whole issue of inequalities. In the partnership, at least this year, there is a seminar planned for Southeast Europe to happen in Montenegro on cross-sectoral approaches to delivering youth-friendly services. So definitely the work of the discussions here and in other past activities will go there. There is also seminar planned for engaging with the South Med cooperation. So there, obviously, some of these issues are at the heart of how to promote and develop and strengthen youth work and good youth policy. And there is also something planned to take forward this only opening of the broader reflections on how the youth sector engages with the situation of young refugees, what is the value that we can bring forward. And so there will be perhaps a research activity this year, and this is essentially what the partnership tries to do, to carry out research and to bring it forward to the two institutions who already are having in place mechanisms for using that research. So these are three perhaps activity moments. Other than that, I strongly encourage you to revisit the page of the symposium. We try to make it as a library. So there's been a lot of heavy input, perhaps, a lot of useful content. So please go revisit, read the papers. Some of them are provocative, but that is also a point for all of us. Some of you have asked about a list of contacts. You will receive it by email, and in that email we will also send you a link to an evaluation. Please complete it and give us your opinions. This is very important for future activities. We try to take on board as much as possible. And finally, on the outcomes, obviously, again, as part of the partnership activities, we carry out research, and these analytical papers will end up in another publication that we hope helps many policymakers, especially, I suppose, but also practitioners, and it will be called Unequal Europe, hopefully to be ready for next year. So some of the practitioners who are here, perhaps we will the editorial team on Perspectives on Youth series will contact you to see if you would like to contribute. Yeah, let's go do our job. Let's go continue and carry out some of these messages that we have all agreed are very important, but it's also up to us to make them reality. So thank you very much. Thank you all, the whole team, the facilitators, General Rapporteur. I'm very thankful for the mentioning by the two institutions, but it's a team in the partnership that has really contributed to this event. So very hard work by everyone. So let's go enjoy Budapest tonight, and tomorrow back to work. Thank you.